I'm a woman who has spent many years living in a way that makes other people uneasy, not because anything was wrong, but because it didn't look the way they expected it to look. After a certain point in my life, people started saying things like, "You shouldn't be alone this much," or "You need to be around more people," or "This can't be healthy." They said it kindly. They were worried, and for a while, I listened. I started wondering if there was something wrong with me simply because my life looked quieter than theirs. The strange thing is, before those comments, I wasn't unhappy. I wasn't searching for something. I wasn't counting what was missing. I was just living my days, one after another, at a pace that felt natural to me. But once the question was planted, should I feel lonely? Should I want more? I began to doubt myself, not because my life had changed, but because the story I was told about my life had. That's how it happens for a lot of us. We're fine until someone reminds us of what we're supposed to want. We're steady until we start measuring our lives against a standard we never agreed to. And suddenly, a quiet life starts to feel like a problem that needs fixing. I didn't realize it at the time, but I wasn't struggling with my life. I was struggling with the idea that my life didn't match the picture everyone else carried in their heads. And once I saw that difference clearly, everything else began to change. For a long time, I thought the discomfort I felt was coming from my circumstances. I thought it was because I lived quietly, because my days weren't crowded, because my calendar had more empty space than most people seemed comfortable with. But when I look back now, I can see that wasn't the real source of the tension at all. The unease didn't come from how I was living. It came from how my life was being interpreted by others, and eventually, by me. We live in a culture that treats fullness as proof of meaning. Busy schedules, full houses, constant plans, these things are seen as signs of a life well lived. And anything that doesn't look like that is quietly labeled as lacking. Not broken, exactly, just incomplete. So when your life is quieter, the world doesn't ask if you're content. It asks what's missing. That question gets under your skin. You start scanning your own days for problems that weren't there before. You notice the silence more. You second-guess your preferences. You wonder if comfort means stagnation, if peace means avoidance. And slowly, without realizing it, you stop trusting your own experience. What I eventually understood is this. Most of us aren't suffering because our lives are empty. We're suffering because we're constantly being told how a full life is supposed to look. And when our reality doesn't match that image, we assume the fault must be ours. But a mismatch doesn't automatically mean a mistake. Sometimes it just means you're built differently. Once I separated my actual feelings from the expectations surrounding them, something loosened inside me. I could finally ask a more honest question, not what should my life look like, but how does my life actually feel when I stop judging it? And that question led me somewhere very different. It took me a long time to understand something that now feels obvious, but at the time changed everything for me. Being alone and being lonely are not the same thing, not even close. They get used interchangeably, but they point to very different experiences. One is about physical presence, the other is about emotional connection. And confusing the two causes an enormous amount of unnecessary pain. You can be alone and feel completely at ease. You can wake up, move through your day, and feel grounded in who you are without another person in the room. And you can also be surrounded by people, family, co-workers, even friends, and feel deeply, painfully lonely. I've seen both. I've lived both. Loneliness doesn't come from the absence of people. It comes from the absence of being known. What finally shifted things for me was asking the right question. Not am I spending too much time alone, but do I have connection that actually matters? Those are very different questions, and they lead to very different answers. I realized I didn't need constant interaction to feel connected. I needed honesty, familiarity, a sense that someone, somewhere, truly understood who I was. For me, that connection might be a single conversation once a week. For someone else, it might look like daily interaction. Neither is better, neither is worse. The problem starts when we assume there's one correct amount of connection for everyone. Once I stopped measuring my life by how crowded it looked and started measuring it by how it felt, the tension I'd been carrying quietly began to dissolve. That realization opened the door to another one. If connection matters more than proximity, then how I structured my days suddenly mattered in a different way. Once I understood that connection mattered more than proximity, I began to notice something else quietly shaping my days. When you live alone, time behaves differently. Without shared meals, shared schedules, or someone else's expectations pulling the hours into place, the day can easily lose its edges. Morning bleeds into afternoon. Afternoon slips into evening. And when days have no shape, they start to feel unreal, like they don't quite count. That's when routine stopped feeling restrictive to me and started feeling protective. I don't mean rigid rules or packed schedules. I mean simple anchors. I wake up at the same time most mornings. I make my tea the same way, in the same mug. I sit in the same chair by the window and give myself a few quiet minutes before the world rushes in. It's not exciting, but it tells my nervous system, you're here. This day is real. When I lived with my husband, our routine was built around each other. Dinner at a certain hour, evening shaped by his hunger, his habits, his rhythm. After he was gone, I kept that schedule out of habit, until one evening I realized I wasn't even hungry yet. So I waited, and in that small decision, something shifted. I wasn't being lonely. I was learning my own rhythm for the first time in years. Routine, I've learned, isn't about control. It's about continuity. It keeps the days from dissolving into each other. It gives your life a steady pulse when no one else is there to provide one. And when you live alone, that matters more than people realize. Structure doesn't steal freedom. It makes freedom livable. Without those small rituals, the quiet can turn heavy. With them, the quiet becomes spacious. And once your days have a shape, you start to notice something else, the subtle relief of being needed, even in the smallest ways. Once my days had a shape again, I noticed something else that mattered more than I expected. When you live alone, there's no one automatically depending on you. No shared responsibilities, no unspoken expectations, no one asking if you'll be home for dinner. And while that freedom can be comforting, it can also feel strangely weightless. Not heavy enough to hurt, but light enough to make you drift. That's why having something that needs you changes everything. For me, it's my cat. She has a very strong opinion about breakfast, and she expresses it loudly if I'm late. She doesn't care how I slept or what kind of mood I'm in. She expects me to show up, and somehow That expectation grounds me. It gives the morning a purpose beyond my own thoughts. It doesn't have to be a pet. It could be a garden that needs watering, birds you feed, a small routine that only exists because you keep it alive. What matters is that something in the world changes if you don't show up. On the days when motivation is low and the quiet feels heavier than usual, that small responsibility becomes a lifeline. It pulls you out of your head and back into the moment. I also keep a simple notebook where I write down the birds that come to my feeder, the date, the time, how many I see. It might sound unnecessary, but it gives me something to notice, something to wait for. When you live alone, attention becomes precious. If you don't choose where to place it, it turns inward and stays there. Being needed, even in small ways, isn't about obligation. It's about presence. It reminds you that your days matter because you are part of something ongoing. And once you feel that, you start to realize that not every connection needs to be loud to be meaningful. When you live alone, you become much more aware of how limited your social energy really is. There's no background noise of constant interaction, no momentum carrying you from one conversation to the next. Every phone call, every visit, every invitation costs something, and because it costs something, you start paying attention to what you get in return. I used to think having a full social calendar was a sign of health. More plans meant more proof that I was doing life correctly. But over time, I noticed a pattern I couldn't ignore. Some interactions left me calm, steady, more myself. Others left me strangely exhausted, even if nothing bad had happened. That was the moment I stopped counting people and started noticing how I felt after seeing them. Now my circle is small, very small, by most standards. There are only a few people I genuinely want to talk to, people who don't require performance, people who know my silences as well as my stories. With them, conversation doesn't feel like work. It feels like rest. And rest, I've learned, is a form of connection too. For a long time, I felt guilty about this. I thought it meant I was antisocial or withdrawn, that I should be trying harder to want more company. But wanting less isn't the same as needing less. It's just knowing your limits. Quality doesn't replace quantity because it's superior. It replaces it because it's sustainable. One real conversation can nourish you for days. 10 polite ones can drain you without you even realizing why. When you live alone, you don't have the luxury of wasting emotional energy on relationships that feel hollow, so you become selective, not out of fear, but out of respect for your own well-being. And once you stop apologizing for a smaller circle, something shifts again. You start to see that the most important relationship you'll ever have isn't with the world outside you. It's the one you have with yourself when no one else is around. There's a part of living alone that no one really prepares you for, and it has nothing to do with silence or empty rooms. It's the moment you realize there's no one left to distract you from yourself, no one to absorb your moods, no one to soften your edges, no one to fill the space when your thoughts turn uncomfortable. When you live alone, you are face to face with who you are every single day. For a long time, I didn't like that very much. I thought I was too quiet, too boring, too content with small things. I watched other people move through life louder, faster, more socially, and I assumed they were doing it right and I was somehow falling behind. I compared my inner pace to their outer performance and decided I was the problem. So I tried to fix myself. I said yes when I wanted to say no. I stayed out longer than I wanted. I filled my days so I wouldn't have to sit with my own thoughts for too long. But none of that made me happier. It just made me tired. And one evening, sitting alone in my living room, I realized something simple and unsettling. If I didn't learn to enjoy my own company, no amount of other people would save me from feeling empty. That understanding didn't arrive all at once. It came slowly, through small acts of acceptance, letting myself enjoy a quiet morning without calling it lazy, going to bed early without apologizing for it, admitting that I like books more than parties and depth more than small talk. And finally, at some point, I stopped trying to justify my preferences. Liking your own company isn't about becoming self-sufficient or closed off. It's about making peace with who you are when no one else is watching. When you live alone, that relationship becomes unavoidable, and once it softens, once it steadies, something remarkable happens. Solitude stops feeling like absence and starts feeling like alignment. And that's when a deeper question begins to surface, one that changes how you understand struggle itself. There's a question I wish I had learned to ask much earlier in my life, because it would have saved me years of quiet confusion. Am I actually lonely, or do I just believe I'm supposed to be? Those two experiences feel similar on the surface, but they come from very different places, and they require very different responses. Real loneliness is a lack of connection. It's the ache of not being known, not being understood, not having anyone who sees you clearly. That kind of loneliness hurts, and it deserves attention. It needs honesty, courage, and sometimes reaching out even when it feels uncomfortable. That is a real problem, and it shouldn't be ignored. But the other kind is more subtle. It shows up when your life is quiet, your days are steady, and nothing feels particularly wrong until you start comparing, until you notice how full everyone else's lives look from the outside, until a voice, sometimes not even your own, whispers that something must be missing. That isn't loneliness. That's expectation colliding with reality. I lived in that confusion for a long time. I mistook peace for emptiness and simplicity for lack. I tried to fix a problem I didn't actually have, and the more I tried, the further away I felt from myself. Once I separated what I was feeling from what I thought I should be feeling, the weight lifted almost immediately. Not every struggle means something is broken. Sometimes it just means you're holding your life up against the wrong standard. One problem needs connection. The other needs permission to stop chasing a version of life that doesn't fit you. And when you give yourself that permission, you make space for a different truth to emerge, one that can hold both contentment and loss at the same time. There's something important I need to say here, because it's easy to misunderstand a quiet life as an untouched one. I have known deep love, and I have known deep loss. I was married for many years, long enough that another person's presence became part of the structure of my days. When that kind of love ends, it leaves a shape behind, and that shape doesn't disappear just because you learn how to live again. I still notice the empty chair at the table. I still reach for memories without meaning to. Some losses don't soften with time, they simply become familiar. Missing someone doesn't mean your life is empty. It means your life was once full in a particular way. Those two truths can exist together even when the world insists they shouldn't. For a long time, I thought feeling content meant I was betraying my grief, that if I smiled too easily or enjoyed my days too much, it meant the love I'd had didn't matter as much as it should. But grief isn't measured by how much you suffer. It's measured by how deeply someone mattered. And carrying that love forward doesn't require you to stop living. I don't try to replace what I lost. I don't pretend it didn't change me. I simply make room for it. Some days that room feels quiet, other days it feels warm, but it's part of the life I have now, not a reason to reject it. You can honor what's gone without letting it define everything that remains. That understanding took time. It took patience with myself, and it taught me something essential, that a full life doesn't have to look the same in every season. Sometimes fullness is loud and shared. Sometimes it's gentle and solitary. And both can be real. And once you accept that, once you stop measuring your present against a past that can't be repeated, you're finally free to choose how you want to live the days you still have. At some point, without making a formal decision or announcing it to anyone, I stopped trying to adjust my life to make other people comfortable. I didn't change my days. I changed the way I judged them, and that shift did more for my peace of mind than any external change ever could. I realized that not everyone is built for the same volume. Some people come alive in crowds, in movement, in constant exchange. Others come alive in stillness, in familiarity, in the steady repetition of things that don't need to be explained. Neither way is better. They're just different ways of being human. The trouble starts when we try to live someone else's way, because we think that's what a good life is supposed to look like. When I gave myself permission to live quietly, I didn't shrink my life. I made it fit. I stopped apologizing for needing less stimulation, fewer plans, more space. I stopped explaining why a simple day felt like enough. Enough stopped being a compromise and became a choice. That permission didn't come all at once. It arrived slowly, in moments of honesty with myself, in choosing rest over noise, in choosing meaning over appearance, in trusting that if my life felt steady and true on the inside, it didn't need to be impressive on the outside. A life doesn't have to look full to be full. If you're living quietly and wondering if you're missing something, maybe the question isn't what you should add. Maybe it's what you can finally stop chasing. Because when a life fits, it doesn't beg for validation. It simply holds you, day after day, exactly as you are. I want to end this by saying something I wish someone had told me much earlier. A quiet life is not a lesser life. It's just a life that doesn't advertise itself. It doesn't compete for attention. It doesn't need to prove anything to anyone watching from the outside. And because of that, it often goes unnoticed except by the person living it. My days aren't dramatic. They don't look impressive on paper, but they are steady. They are honest. They are made of small moments that add up to something that feels whole to me. And wholeness doesn't require an audience. It only requires that you feel at home inside your own life. If you're listening to this and you've been worried that you're falling behind because your life feels quieter than the ones you see around you, I hope you pause for a moment. Ask yourself how your days actually feel, not how they compare. Comparison is loud. Contentment is quiet. And the world tends to mistake one for the other. Some people are built for solitude. Some are built for crowds. Most of us fall somewhere in between. None of that is a flaw. It's just wiring. And once you stop fighting your own wiring, life becomes less exhausting. You stop performing. You start inhabiting. I still miss what I've lost. I still carry the people who shaped me. But I also carry a life that fits the person I am now. And that is more than enough. If your life feels quieter than the world says it should be, maybe that's not a problem to solve. Maybe it's a truth to accept.